From the University of Tulsa and Public Radio Tulsa, this is Switchyard, a podcast for people hungry for eye-opening essays, moving fiction, soul-stirring poetry, and honest, thought-provoking conversation. I'm Ted Genoways, editor of Switchyard magazine, and your host. Join me and our lineup of literary all-stars as we think through and hash out our world's difficult and fascinating challenges. Ethan Hawke went running by, struggling to do up the pearl snaps on his Western shirt before ducking into Magic City Books. His pants were the same shade of magenta as the bruises on his cheekbone and around his eye. On the other side of Archer Street, in the Arts District of Tulsa, Oklahoma, the camera cut, and director Sterlin Harjo seemed ready to move on. Harjo had started filming a few weeks earlier on the pilot for a new series called The Sensitive Kind. The main character, played by Hawke, is a tribute to Tulsa legend Leroy Chapman, right down to his signature tattoos and straw hat. Chapman, who died in 2015, was a self-trained historian and independent journalist who founded the Center for Public Secrets. Through a series of exposés in the pages of This Land, a small but influential independent magazine where Harjo was the staff video director, Chapman fearlessly sought to force conversations about hidden aspects of Tulsa's past. Leroy was a seeker of truth, Harjo told me. It's easy to see why Harjo so admired Chapman. Like him, Harjo, too, is heavily tattooed, has a taste for Western shirts, and a love of old-style hats. And he, too, is a seeker of truth. Harjo, a citizen of the Seminole and Muskogee nations of Oklahoma, was born and raised in Holdenville. He grew up watching movies on pirated HBO, but initially went to the University of Oklahoma to study art. It was only while he was a student there that he found his way into film. He made a series of independent features, 4 Sheets to the Wind, Barking Water, and Mekko, as well as the documentary This May Be the Last Time, the story of the 1962 disappearance of his grandfather and the Native American hymns that keep the stories of the dead alive. The films were positively reviewed, but nothing could have predicted the breakout success that Harjo experienced with Reservation Dogs, co-created with Academy Award-winning filmmaker Taika Waititi. For 28 pitch-perfect episodes on Hulu, running from 2021 to 2023, Reservation Dogs was the groundbreaking story of a group of 4 teens coping with the death of one of their friends. The storylines blended humor and heartbreak and combined elements of traditional Native storytelling, parodies of Hollywood classics, urban myths, pop music, and zany side quests to create a rich and recognizable portrait of a complex and vital community. The American Film Institute named all 3 seasons to its list of top 10 programs of the year. The show was nominated for a Golden Globe and an Emmy. More importantly, it remade the culture, bringing regional and res slang from Skoden to shit-ass into the popular lexicon. The sudden success has opened a range of opportunities for Harjo, but he's chosen to keep locating his storytelling and his showrunning in Oklahoma. During the filming of The Sensitive Kind, the cast turned up all over town in Tulsa, at Prism Cafe for lunch, at Tina's on South Boston for drinks and late-night burgers, at Circle Cinema, where Harjo and Hawke screened a sneak peek preview of Wildcat, Hawke's biopic of Flannery O'Connor starring his daughter, Maya Hawke. To Harjo, keeping his storytelling as specific and rooted as possible is the key to his success. He has whole worlds yet to explore in Oklahoma, and he has a community of artists, musicians, and filmmakers that he's still hoping to help build. Sterlin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start by asking you, there was something that really struck me in the David Troyer profile of you that was in The Atlantic that quoted a friend of yours describing you as a community guy. And I think that's really true. I first saw you around town at the presidential lecture at the University of Tulsa, but I've seen you around all sorts of places. I've seen you at Chimera Coffee House. I've seen you at Lowood before it sadly burned down. And then we actually met at this new songwriter series that's in the basement at St. Cecilia's. So it strikes me that it's true that you're really out in the community and that you seem to see yourself as a part of something.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I don't know how people don't engage in the community. The whole fame thing and the success of Reservation Dogs is great, but also I can tell if that didn't happen, people wouldn't be surprised to see me at places. I've always been a community person, and specifically in Tulsa, I love the music here and I like to be a part of it. I don't play in any bands. I've hinted at it, but I love being a part of it. I love supporting musicians. I love being in a place where I can help things change, and I've done that here, and I've seen it happen multiple times. And to be in a place and not be engaged in communities would be strange to me, but I love supporting artists. I mean, like I just put out a new video that I did with Ken Pomeroy, and the last one before that was the Turnpike Troubadours and Jacob Tovar, and last night I was at Kaylin Faye's singer-songwriter night over at the New Colony, and yeah, I just love listening to music, and I also love throwing support behind people and trying to help people because no one did that for me. I'm not saying no one did that for me. I'm saying like locally they didn't necessarily. Like I have a lot of people that help me, but when your industry isn't necessarily in a town, I'm not saying this negatively. Everyone's trying to better themselves in it. But where I come from and how I grew up, I've always known that community can make everything better and stronger. And if we try to focus on that while we work on our own stuff singularly, I think that the community uplifts and there becomes this support system. And I don't know, it's cheesy and sounds silly, but planting seeds and then all of a sudden you have a garden instead of just one plant.
This question of community is interesting to me because I see this worldview, this attitude in the way that Reservation Dogs is constructed. One of the things that strikes me about it is really kind of a show without a main character, that everyone is fully developed, everyone feels equally important within the community that's created in the show, but consequently has an important place in the storyline.
You're right. And I think what's cool about Reservation Dogs now that I'm not making it anymore is I love how people responded to this because I didn't necessarily start out with this plan. I knew it was happening. I knew that's where it was going, but I didn't know it would be so noticeable. I should have. But the idea that all of a sudden it becomes not about 4 kids, but about a whole community. I love that. And I love that people feel it. And I love that people recognize it as something that they hadn't seen. But it's not like Native representation in film. It's not like we've had a bunch of good examples, small examples, and we're building on that. We've had hundreds of years of really bad representation up until like 3 years ago. But I wanted to tell this sprawling tale that came from our community that touched on a lot of things without being preachy at all, without trying to shove a message down anyone's throat. And the only way to do that was to represent the whole community and give weight to everyone in that community. And I think that it was just kind of reflecting home. But also, I think Reservation Dogs is a bit violent in its conception and attack, but you wouldn't necessarily ever describe it as violent. But there's a lot of things that are talked about in there that had never been talked about before. I felt like we were trying to catch up, and there was a lot of bad representation that had really slowed us down, and we needed to do a lot and do a lot fast. And so a lot of what needed to happen, I think, is in that show, whether it's not stigmatizing suicide, being able to talk about that because it is prevalent in our communities, talking about the importance of friendship, talking about the importance of uncles and aunties and how they also are part of raising you, talking about our humor and our music and just life, how it was, you know, like there's so many boarding schools, the Deer Lady, our mythologies, like everything I needed to cram into a show eloquently. And it had to be about a community to do that, I think.
I think that's right. And there is such tremendous energy that comes from all of those tonal shifts and from, like you said, having this suicide that is the central motivating force, but then so much humor and, like I said, that there can be that shift of tone, which to me is always what feels most true to life.
Yeah, it's weird that it's not done as much. I think it naturally comes out of me, but a lot of people are surprised by it, I guess, and people ask me how we did that, and it was very natural. It just felt like life. It's like native life. It's funny and it's sad. And yeah, like those are my favorite movies too, but not a lot of people do them. I don't know if it's because it's hard for people to execute it or not, but I mean, like Hal Ashby, I love his films. I would say they walk that line. Like, I get bored if it's just a drama or if it's just a comedy.
Agreed. I think it's interesting that this is talked about as being a kind of breakthrough, as you said, in Native representation. But to me, it feels very specific to Oklahoma. It feels very specific to small town Oklahoma, too, where there is all of this kind of mixing together.
I think small town Oklahoma is one of the most diverse places in the world. No one knows that. I grew up, I think my hometown of 5,000 people, Holdenville, I think it's more diverse than Tulsa as far as like people together, going to school together, eating at the same places. You can go to a restaurant in Holdenville, Pat's Cafe right now, and you'll find every walk of life in there. Everybody knows each other and everybody's a part of that community. I wanted to show that. Some people might think, oh, you know, the diversity police got to him and he wanted to fill the frame with every race and whatever. But it's not. It's a reflection of rural Oklahoma.
Yeah, absolutely. I also love the fact that while this is set in a small town, it doesn't pretend the way a lot of dramatized versions of small towns do, that it's a kind of bubble that nothing penetrates. The thing that motivates the whole storyline is this group of kids looking to go to California.
Right.
But it's so much more than that. Everything that permeates the atmosphere is coming from the outside as much as it is coming from the inside.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it was growing up. You know, small town, depending on what was popular at the time, it was like, there was a point where we thought we were gangsters in South Central LA with Boys in the Hood and all of that, and gangster rap. And then Dazed and Confused dropped on us, and we all became hippies, Texas hippies, and driving hot rods and stuff and smoking a lot of weed. So yeah, very influenced from the outside. I hate movies that try to, I don't know, you can just tell when a small town or rural area is treated a certain way. I hated the movie Nebraska. Everyone's dumb and just like really country and like they're aliens, you know? And I don't know, some of the smartest people I know are from rural America, rural Oklahoma, you know. If the shit hit the fan and the zombie apocalypse or whatever happened, I wouldn't be hanging out with my friends in Tulsa. I would go home.
Exactly, right?
I'll hang out with my friends in Tulsa at a nice restaurant or go watch a band play, but not if there's a zombie apocalypse.
Well, and that's the thing, right? And this shows up with the characters, that they know gangster rap, but they also know how to dress a deer carcass.
Right.
And like you said, your friends in Tulsa probably don't know the second part
they
of
don't know
that
as much. Yeah, you know, they're good. They know where burger night is or Taco Tuesday.
Yeah.
But during the apocalypse, I don't know that tacos will be being made.
And I want to say, too, it strikes me that in some ways, something like Mekko is a kind of inverse of that story. Like, that's also, in its own way, a story about small towns, like the desire to get to the city where there's this belief that things are going to be better or different or whatever, that you can move your life forward. And it's, as is the heart of the story of Reservation Dogs, it's not that simple. It's not a physical journey.
Right. Yeah, it's weird. Like, all of my films are about going home, coming back home, leaving home, something in relation to home. And I think that's kind of how it is down there, you know? It's like, oh, you know, Billy left. Where's he going? Oh, he got a welding job in Tulsa. Oh, wow, that's good. Good for him, you know, good for him. And everyone's like really happy for people that get out, but not really. Everyone's a little afraid that something bad's going to happen to them. And when someone comes back, everyone's very happy. But Mekko is about a few things. I think that We were doing This Land Press at the time, right before that. And This Land was pretty beautiful in that we saw it change Tulsa. And I don't know if anyone would ever say that other than the people that were there and saw it happen with me, but it definitely did. I think Tulsa is the way it is right now because of This Land, because of storytelling. And I think that's how powerful storytelling is. It gave Tulsa an identity. We didn't know what to do with all of this stuff. There's the race massacre that people are trying to hide and not talk about. And there's all this other darkness. But there's a lot of things to be proud of. And This Land said, we're going to talk about all of it and not filter any of it. And I think storytelling and truth in storytelling can change things. And I saw it change. And I saw Tulsa discover its identity and everyone gravitate towards that little building that we were working in. And then it became 2 buildings. And then it all fell apart. And it falls apart because of financial reasons or a mix of things. Financial reasons, personal reasons. Utopia doesn't last. There's always like the cannibal waiting on the food to run out and eat you. And it was really beautiful, and I think back on it very fondly. But at the time, when I wrote Mekko, that's what it was about to me. It was about Mekko going from his small town, finding a community on the streets, and then a darkness invading that community and breaking it apart. It was also sort of an allegory, I guess, for the Dawes Act and the Dawes Commission and how the government broke up our community and slowly poisoned the original nature of the way that we live and what we hold important. And I did it through the streets of Tulsa and people living on the streets. It was a lot of fun. I think we're about a decade, almost the 10-year reunion of that movie.
Yeah. And talking about the transformational power of storytelling, take us back to the beginning. Where does that come from for you? What do your early experiences of storytelling look like? How does it come into your life?
A lot of ways. Great storytellers in my house and always at my house or at my grandma's house. My son's the same way. He's 7, and he's the exact same way I was. I had fun with my cousins, but I would rather sit in the kitchen and listen to the adults tell stories. And they told great stories. And it was a mix of native storytelling and rural storytelling, which I think is important because that's how we entertain ourselves. And they talk about a lot of death. They talk about people that are gone. They talk about old stories about people. They're always funny. And that's the way it came to me. And then I went to these Indian Baptist churches where you had preachers that were tent revival almost, but in a native way. And you'd hear them yelling stories. And I spent weekends with my white grandma, and she was one of the best storytellers in the world. I mean, she was from Sasakwa, Oklahoma. She could remember everything. And she talked about everyone. And all of her stories were about community as well. And she always had these crazy names with people with people with nicknames and things like that. I've always wanted to make a movie called Sasakwa, because you would think that it's this crazy, interesting metropolis of mythological creatures and really interesting people. Maybe like a medieval city or something. That's what it feels like, the way she would tell stories. But it's not. It's 500 people. Most of the town burned down. And the way she talks about it, though, and there were more people when she was younger, but the way she talks about it is pretty fantastic. Yeah, no, I got a lot from her as well. And then she would take me, when I was with her, I would go with her to the Episcopal Church, and I would put a robe on and be an acolyte. And then sometimes we would be at the ceremonial stomp dances or tribal functions in general, wild onion dinners and things. I was just surrounded by things and had a really interesting upbringing, I think. My mom was a hairdresser. And she also ended up working for the tribe. But first, she was a hairdresser. And I just remember hanging out at her salon. There was a kind of uncle cousin of ours that owned it, Blackie Buck. And she cut hair there. And I would just hang out and I would get lost and go sneak around in the back, weird back. It always smelled like perm because it was the 80s, you know. That's why my mom had to quit cutting hair, because her hands started getting damaged from perm chemicals. But for a while, she was the woman that cut everyone's hair in high school. All the football players would come every Friday and get their hair cut from her. all the cheerleaders and girls would come and get perms from her. So you just meet a lot of people naturally that way. And then my dad has taught martial arts since I was 4.
Right.
And I fought competitively since I was 4. And that was interesting because race doesn't really play into a hair salon or a martial arts school. I just think back on what life was like pre-meth in my hometown, and it was really kind of an idyllic town. It was really awesome. Like, I really loved growing up there. I mean, we got in trouble, and especially once we started drinking and everything, it got like, and partying in high school, it got dark, and then meth came into rural America, and also a prison moved into Holdenville, which I think also fucked things up. But yeah, storytelling was kind of always there. I always tell stories, and it's kind of how I talk. I just had a lot of really good examples all around me and a lot of stories all the time.
And then you've talked about being influenced also by, in the same way we were talking about, by things coming from the outside.
Right.
I mean, I'd love seeing you talk about Ice Cube's Friday,
Right.
or S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders.
Yeah, Outsiders was really big for me when I was a kid. And I don't know if S.E. Hinton likes me, but don't meet your heroes. One time we asked her if we could do a show adaptation of The Outsiders, and I think she got really mad. But anyway, yeah, I loved The Outsiders growing up. I read the book and watched the movie. And that movie, like, I just felt like I was in it. Van Morrison and them, Gloria playing throughout the whole movie. And I still watch it. And I showed my kids The Outsiders the other day. It's still so good to me. I love Rumblefish too. But I didn't catch Rumblefish till later. The Outsiders was big. Movies for me were always big. And my dad's a big movie guy, and we would watch everything together. My dad had a friend who worked at a cable company and gave us free cable. We had one of those boxes, and so we got everything at the time. And it was the era of Goonies, Lost Boys, Platoon, Howard the Duck, and all of that stuff. And I think I watched Porky's way too young. It was that era, and we watched those movies until we knew them by heart. And then we also got into this show called Tour of Duty. And we knew that by heart. Like, it was crazy how much me and my dad could quote movies front to back to you. I was not really censored about what I could or couldn't watch. Big for me was Michael Jackson's Thriller, because the making of Michael Jackson's Thriller. I was a giant Michael Jackson fan. Yeah. I had a glove with sequins on it and glued to it that my aunt made. And I had a perm. I mean, I had it all. I was a big Michael Jackson fan. And Thriller came out, and the making of Thriller was on the VHS, and you could watch the making of it. And I was fascinated by that. Like, it's the first behind the scenes I'd ever seen. And I was like, the first time I realized, oh, they make all this stuff. And you get to see how they make the masks and the makeup and everything, choreography. And I was pretty blown away by that. And that gave me this idea of like, oh, there's people make this stuff. I still didn't think I could do it or would have the opportunity to do it, but it did show me that it's not just magically there. The people make it.
So when do you start to get the idea that this is something that you want to do yourself?
Not until college. I always wanted to be a painter and an artist. Since I was a kid, I was the kid that drew. And anytime someone needed someone to draw something, they would get me. So I went to University of Oklahoma for painting. And after my freshman year, we partied a lot and we had a lot of fun in art school. And I didn't make the grade average that I needed to stay in art school. And so I went on academic probation. So I switched majors and I took Intro to Film and Video Studies. And there was a teacher named Misha Nedeljkovic. And this is also around the time when independent films were big in the late 90s. And that's when I fell in love with it, because Misha had this way of teaching. His love for cinema was very infectious, and he showed me that filmmaking is a language. It is not just randomly putting the camera somewhere. And once I got into that, and once I had all of these movies and could go back and start watching all of this sort of film history, I fell in love with it, and that's when I switched. Never looked back. I just did it. I just kept doing it. I told people at that time, I'm going to make a film, and I just never quit. For better, for worse, I was like, I'm going to keep making this stuff if it kills me.
It hasn't yet.
Not yet. No, it will.
Well, that love for filmmaking and for learning that language, it's wonderful. It's so present in Reservation Dogs, some of the very things that you mentioned. I mean, the references to Platoon, and that there is a jumping in and claiming a spot in that conversation.
Well, it's also what we were talking earlier about influences coming from outside. I mean, that is how we live in a small town. You're trying to act like you're not there.
Right.
And the kids live through these references too. It was a way to move through genre with each episode, but also a way to show that a lot of their influences are coming from the outside and pop culture.
So in that context, I have to ask about William Knifeman.
Right.
I know Dallas Goldtooth a little bit from days of covering the Keystone XL fight and floated
his other job
into some of that. So tell me about the evolution of this character. And
I feel like I've been a part of these movements, and I know I have, but it's weird to be able to say that because there's been a lot of little pockets of movements happening. And I've been a part of them. This Land, Tulsa, reframing itself. The Imagine Native Film Festival in Toronto was a big thing. We all come of age there and supported each other and became filmmakers. Taika and Dennis and a lot of filmmakers that are on my show that directed was there. And Tribe Called Red came out of that. Like, there was a lot of art that came out of that community that was built in Toronto. And then the Sundance community, we came out of that. And then there was Santa Fe, which is like the Indian Market and Film Festival, and we all kind of mingled and hung out there. And then Oklahoma in general, I think, has this thing. But then there's the 1491s, and the 1491s was just a comedy group that we started because we were doing videos and there's no place to put funny Native humor anywhere. So we started doing that. And it got popular in Indian country, and we started doing a live show and traveling with it. And it really sustained us for like a decade. We lived on doing that, learned comedy. I learned how to shoot comedy. We learned how to make it work on stage. And one of the things we learned, if it's all white people, they have a hard time laughing when it's Indians on stage trying to make them laugh. And I think there's guilt baked in there. There's a lot of history and context that makes it hard to, they don't want to be making fun of us, or they don't know how to feel. And this is kind of confronting some of that guilt. And we realized that if it's an all-white audience or majority white audience, we needed to give permission for them to laugh. It helped frame our humor. And then we went to a narrator, and that's his job as the narrator, to also let people know it's okay. He literally just says it in the opening, like, white people, it's okay to laugh. And that's what William Knifeman is. He's the character that shows non-natives what native humor is, because he does it outlandishly and at once makes fun of history and how we've been depicted, but also kind of acknowledges that some of that's real. And frames native humor, shows you how that works, but also it's something familiar to a non-native audience. Like, oh, I don't know what these kids are. I've never seen Indians in slides and gym shorts, but I recognize this. And then he helps guide you and welcomes you in and kind of flips it on its head and shows you that, like, we're going to be making fun of a lot of this stuff, you know? And so I think that he is that character. He is the person that kind of helps non-native audiences get into the world.
Well, and it's such a great narrative device, the spirit who's supposed to be guiding the young warrior on his journey, and he has no idea what he's doing.
We were shooting that scene where I wrote this line in there: "Carry on, my wayward son, there will be peace when you're..." But he's like, "Carry on, my wayward son, there will be peace when you are done." And he throws the French fry and hits Bear with it. Dallas could not remember that line for the life of him. He kept saying, and it was so hot that day, we were all mad at him, and he kept saying, "Carry on, my wayward son, there will be peace when we are finished." It's like, what are you doing? It's a famous song. I started playing it on a loudspeaker.
Well, he got it eventually.
Yeah.
Although I'm not sure that line was delivered on camera. I think it may have been.
It might have been on Bear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think part of it was on camera.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to ask about some of the other things that you've got going. You mentioned working on the music videos. That's one aspect of things. I think that's especially intriguing in terms of how you see that relationship between more the long form storytelling and then this short form of just trying to capture a musical performance and a musical feel.
I learned how to edit by doing music videos for my late friend's band back in college, Jeff Johnston. And that's how I learned how to edit. I took a loan out and started shooting videos for him. So I've always kind of loved it. I'm sort of a disgruntled musician, I think. And I love when it's all about communication. And I love when a musician can communicate with their performance and with their song. And I mean, that night that I ran into you at the singer-songwriter, it was John Moreland, Justin Bloss, and Kim Pomeroy. Just a magical night. Every one of their songs was jaw-dropping, and they were so good together. There's a couple things. To me, they're like short stories. It's like, how do I visually tell this story with this song? Kind of help make it good. I'm not super interested in very stylized music videos, though. I like people, I like the performer. So I like doing things simply. It's a way for me to also help this community that I love. We all donated our time to do Ken's video because it's hard when you're first starting out as a musician. And I'm at a place where I can pay for things and help people out in ways that I think that there wasn't a lot of that when I was starting out. It's great to have help outside, but you also need to find it locally. And it's like a collaboration with a musician. I tend to have a lot of musician friends.
I think it's fascinating sort of taking this back to this land and that idea of community building. And I see that in all that you're doing, that it is this attempt to not just put somebody in the soundtrack on the show, but to find a way to keep working and to find a way to keep supporting some of those people that you believe in.
Right.
And I think that has created some buzz around Tulsa. It's created this sense of, oh, this is a place where things are happening.
Right.
I wonder, Reservation Dogs and now Killers of the Flower Moon got a lot of attention, but not a lot of award recognition. I wonder what you make of that.
I think that awards are always late to the game. We're taking these monumental steps, but racism is a knot that is not easy to untie. And I think that we are untying it now, but it's not going to just all of a sudden one day be, oh, we're all the same and we're all going to be judged the same. Right. And the old white Academy voter living in Malibu, he doesn't give a shit about Native representation right now. It's going to, like in 5-10 years, it'll be just common and will be awarded like everyone else. But I think at first it's hard. It's like Bob Dylan going electric. It hurts. Change hurts. And then all of a sudden you're on board with it, you know?
Yeah, I can say for myself, maybe I shouldn't have been shocked, but I really was that Lily Gladstone didn't.
It was very shocking. Yeah. I thought she had it. I texted her the day after, and I wanted her to win, but I'm also relieved for her. She'll get it. She'll be back there, and she'll get it. But I know how hard that is. She did it so well. From shooting that film and all the pressure of that to this awards campaign is so tough. And I'd run into her every now and then on the road in LA or whatever. We'd hang. But, you know, it's brutal. And I wasn't doing half as much as she's done. So if part of me was just really happy that she gets to rest and make some films.
Right.
Of course, we want her to win, but I think she will very soon. She's already there.
Yeah. So you're getting ready to start shooting a new show.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that at all?
There's some amazing people in the show, but their deals aren't closed, so I can't.
Okay.
But Ethan Hawke and Keith David are in it. And speaking of Platoon, I get Keith David from Platoon. Like that's The Thing. That's crazy to me. And there's some old Okie expats that are coming to be in it that I can't say yet, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And it's about Tulsa. If Reservation Dogs was my look at the rural Oklahoma, this is my look at the city and still examining Oklahoma. And it's funny and it's dramatic. It's an hour, so it's called a drama, but it's funny as well. Sort of a Tulsa noir is what we call it. And it's in the tradition of some of those movies like The Long Goodbye, Chinatown, The Big Lebowski, Inherent Vice, lives in that world.
It seems like a good space to be in. How are you feeling at this point?
Really good. We have all of our locations locked in. Yeah, I'm just ready to do it. And it's a script that I wrote. Some of the This Land Days inspired it as well. We lost a person that was a writer, Leroy Chapman. And some of the work that I did with him inspired this show. He's no longer with us, but he did a lot of amazing things. I mean, including writing articles about Tate Brady. Since we're in the church studio right now, he had a bootleg of a Poem is a Naked Person, the Leon Russell doc.
Right.
By Les Blank. And he used to project it on walls and we would watch it. And that's the first time I saw it. It was years before it came out. He was a seeker of truth and he worked as a rare book salesman. The character is a shout out to him and Bill Raybon, the painter, two people that I really liked a lot and worked with who are no longer with us. So the character's name is Lee Raybon and he's a rare book salesman and he's also a journalist. He doesn't want to be a journalist, but he has to pay the bills. But yeah, it's about Tulsa. It's a look inward at us and it's funny.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I assume that this is an outgrowth of Ethan Hawke's appearing on Reservation Dogs.
It's sort of a outgrowth of getting sick of shows like Yellowstone and the fakery of all of that. And I wanted to do an hour about crime and something real. And I'd heard FX was looking for another hour. And this was actually a feature film that I started writing 6 years ago. And I only had 10 pages. So when I was editing Reservation Dogs season 3, I started writing this and I wrote it quickly and was looking around thinking of actors. Ethan and I are friends. We've written scripts together and everything. So I sent him the script because I wanted him to play him, but I didn't know if he would. And it's written as like 10 years younger than him, but I sent it to him. And he read it and he was like, man, I really love this. He was like, I wish I was young enough to play Lee. And I was like, well, there's an easy fix. I can change that. And so I did. Sort of rewrote it for Ethan.
That's wonderful.
And the title comes from a J.J. Cale song. The Sensitive Kind is the title. J.D. McPherson's doing the music, which is pretty exciting. Yeah. It's his first time to do this type of thing.
When you come from a place, I think, and are really rooted in the place, that there can be this fear of it seeming too regional, too provincial, or small bore to a national audience. But I think it's really amazing the way in which you've built this universe that is deep and rich and locally accurate and specific, but feels like a whole universe. It feels like a place that any of us could inhabit.
Right. I mean, I think that people are kind of sick of the broad, generalized storytelling. I think people are really looking for specificity and worlds they haven't seen. You also have to make it relatable to everyone, but that's in the themes and that's in the story. It's not necessarily where it takes place and the characters.
What I admire about this is that there seems to be a kind of certainty that the local and the specific doesn't limit its audience, that you've had a confidence that it will translate to a bigger audience.
I've just always wanted to do that. Like I've always wanted to tell stories from here. I've had so many people tell me that I would never have a career if I stayed here. And I'm the one that did it. There's only a few of us out there that are doing film and TV from where we're from, especially TV. Like it's kind of unheard of. But I admired Richard Linklater, what he did, and Robert Rodriguez as well. People that stayed and told stories about where they're from. I had a meeting with Elizabeth Avion, who was married to Robert Rodriguez and produces films. I had a meeting with her when I moved to Austin when I was like 23. And all the stories were in Oklahoma. And she was like, well, it sounds like you need to move back to Oklahoma and make your films. And I was like, I know, right? And she was like, well, that's what Rick and Robert did. Like they just planted their feet and they wouldn't leave. And that's how it works. And so I was like, all right, I did it. Michelle Satter, who runs the Sundance Filmmakers Lab, after the labs, I was telling her like, yeah, I might move to LA. She was like, don't move to LA. You tell stories at home. Do it there. Don't move out here. And I didn't. And I think my family's been important to me. My community's been important to me. I want to be a part of it and I want to show the beauty that I see to people outside. And I like that not everyone's doing movies here.
You've really had a transformative effect, I think, especially on the view of this kind of storytelling and what can be done with it in, I don't even know, do we still call it TV? What do we call it now?
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't feel like TV.
But I wonder what you're hoping will come in the wake of Reservation Dogs. What sort of stories you're looking for, the sort of things that you're hoping will come out of the work you've done?
I think Reservation Dogs reset the bar and also cleared the palette. And now anything can happen. A horror film, a comedy, a drama, whatever, a romantic comedy. Like, it can happen now because of, I think, Reservation Dogs opening that door and saying, look at all the different things that we can do. I hope to see so many different storytellers, native storytellers, telling stories and making films and TV. Myself, I just have specific point of views, and I've got a lot in development. I'm writing a Jim Thorpe script. I'm writing a script that takes place in the 50s, the relocation era when natives were working in factories in LA and Chicago and New York. And I just hope that stuff keeps happening. I'm also happy to not have the cultural pressure that I had on Reservation Dogs. I mean, it was very scary to me making a show like that and knowing that you could screw it up. And being out from under that's very freeing, and really happy that I did it. It'll probably be the most important thing I ever do, but I'm really glad to not have that pressure on myself. It was very difficult. I wanted to end the show because I didn't want to make the show that was so important and then everyone say, well, that 4th season really dropped off. I just didn't want that to happen. It needs to be perfect. It needs to be perfect forever, and people can always go back to it.
I think you got there. The arc of the whole series, but then also there are standalone episodes that I think are just as good as anything that's ever been done for television, truly. The hunting episode with Willie Jack is something that will stick with me forever.
I love that one. Yeah. That was just literally me and my dad. We used to go across the dirt road from my parents' house into the forest and hunt or camp and just act like it was ours, and it wasn't. It was literally Texas ranchers owned it, and they were never there, so we just used it like it was ours, and we fished and we hunted, and we were always out there. And to me, it was just ours. And then Dad would tell me stories about some Texas ranchers own this. And one day my dad was in a tree stand, and 2 of the ranchers walked by, and they were talking about their wives, and my dad was really quiet in camo. They didn't see him. And they bulldozed it, and they put cows out there. And that was brutal to see. This magical place of your childhood just get bulldozed, every tree, just like giant piles of trees everywhere, and no more hunting over there. It's kind of growing back now, but it's crazy to see that happen. I just wanted to tell a real story, and the challenge was trying to tell a story about 2 people just talking in the woods. That was the North Star of season 1. Like, I wanted to be able to make a show that I could do that.
Yeah, well, and as you say it, I mean, it's 2 people talking, and yet all of those tonal shifts, things get very serious, they get very funny. It's the way things actually go when 2 people who really know each other are just out there killing time, waiting for a deer that never shows up.
It shows up.
Well, Sterlin, thank you so much for your time, for all the work that you've been doing, the way in which you're making everyone aware of the richness and complexity of this part of Oklahoma. And I just thank you for that work.
Yeah, thank you. This has been fun to do, especially at the church studio.
It's a good spot.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to Switchyard. I'm your host, Ted Genoways. If you liked this episode and you want to support our podcast, please share it with your friends, post about it on social media, and leave a rating and review. Switchyard is a production of the University of Tulsa and Public Radio Tulsa. We made this episode with executive producer Marianne Andre and Charles Lipper and Cass Ali at Volubility Podcasting. Special thanks to TU President Brad Carson and the Church Studio.